A family gathering, Thanksgiving, Christmas, a birthday. It does not matter which one. 2 tables. The children's table, loud and chaotic, full of games and spilled drinks and the particular energy that children produce when adults are not paying attention. And the adult table, where the conversations are longer, the voices are lower, and the topics are heavier. A child, maybe 8 years old, is sitting at the adult table, not because they were told to, not because there were no seats at the other table, because the children's table felt wrong. The noise was too much. The games felt pointless. The conversations felt shallow, even though the child did not have the word for shallow yet. They sat with the adults and followed the conversation, not contributing, but absorbing, understanding more than anyone assumed, feeling strangely at home in a space that was not designed for them. And nobody questioned it because the child was quiet and well-behaved and did not cause problems, which is exactly what the system needed from them. That child is now an adult, and they have heard the same sentence from different people across their entire life. You have an old soul. The sentence is meant as a compliment. It has never felt like one, because behind the maturity that everyone admires, behind the composure, the emotional steadiness, the ability to read a room and navigate complexity that most peers cannot touch, there is a mechanism that was not a gift. It was an installation. And the installation happened before the person was old enough to consent to it. The first mechanism has a clinical name. Ivan Boszormenyi-Nagy described it in 1973 as parentification, the process by which a child is recruited, usually without anyone naming what is happening, into the role of emotional caretaker for one or both parents. The mother who shares her marital frustrations with her 12-year-old daughter. The father who relies on his 10-year-old son to keep the household calm when things get tense. The parent who does not have another adult to process with and unconsciously promotes the most perceptive child into the role of confidant, mediator, or emotional stabilizer. The child does not refuse this role because the child does not know it is a role. It feels like being trusted. It feels like being needed. It feels like what a good kid does. Gregory Jerkovich expanded this in 1997, documenting how parentified children develop advanced emotional competence at the cost of their own developmental needs. They learn to read emotions before they learn to process their own. They learn to manage tension before they learn to play. They become fluent in the language of adult distress, while their own childhood language, the language of need and mess and not knowing, atrophies from disuse. The second mechanism operates at the social level. Linda Burton described adultification in 2007 as the process by which communities, institutions, and families treat a child as more competent, more responsible, and more autonomous than their developmental stage warrants. This is not always about emotional labor. Sometimes it is about practical demands. The child who translates for immigrant parents at the doctor's office. The oldest sibling who manages the household while a single parent works 2 jobs. The child in a chaotic home who becomes the organizer, the scheduler, the one who remembers what nobody else tracks. The world hands this child adult responsibilities, and the child, lacking the option to refuse, rises to meet them. The competence that develops is real. The emotional cost of developing it at that age is also real. The child learns that their value is located in their usefulness, that being needed is the same as being loved, that reliability is identity. And these equations, written into the operating system before the child can question them, persist for decades. The third mechanism is neurological. Nim Tottenham and Adriana Galvan published research in 2016 on how chronic stress during childhood affects the developmental trajectory of the prefrontal cortex. Under normal conditions, the prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for planning, emotional regulation, impulse control, and complex social reasoning, develops gradually and does not reach full maturity until the mid-20s. Under conditions of chronic stress, elevated cortisol, unpredictable environments, emotional demands that exceed the child's capacity, the prefrontal cortex accelerates its development. It matures faster. It comes online earlier. The child gains access to cognitive tools that their peers will not have for years. This sounds like an advantage. In the short term, it is. The child can regulate emotions that other children cannot. They can plan ahead. They can read social dynamics with a precision that adults find unsettling in someone so young. The cost is that the acceleration comes at the expense of other developmental processes that require the prefrontal cortex to stay immature for longer. Play. Spontaneity. The particular kind of creativity that only exists when the brain is not yet organized enough to be efficient. The child traded those for competence. Not by choice, by necessity. And the maturity everyone notices is the visible side of a developmental bargain that nobody negotiated on the child's behalf. The fourth mechanism connects to what we explored in video 22 about people who see what others miss. Theory of mind, the brain's capacity to model other people's mental states, develops in most children around age 4 or 5 at a basic level. In children who are placed in environments that require constant social monitoring, this capacity overdevelops. The child does not just learn to understand what others think, they learn to predict it, to scan for changes in mood before those changes become visible to anyone else, to detect the split in a parent's breathing pattern that signals the transition from calm to anger, to read the room not as a social skill, but as a survival function. By adulthood, this person can walk into any social environment and, within minutes, map the emotional architecture with a precision that others find either impressive or unnerving. They know who is performing and who is genuine. They know which relationship in the group is under strain. They know when a laugh is real and when it is covering something. And they know all of this automatically, without effort, because the system was installed when effort was not an option. The room had to be read because not reading it was dangerous. This is where the old soul myth belongs. Because the sentence "you have an old soul" delivered as a compliment at dinner parties and job interviews and first dates is not describing a personality trait. It is describing a detection system that was built under duress. What people call wisdom is, in many cases, hypervigilance wearing a nicer outfit. The person is not wise because they have thought deeply about life. They are wise because their nervous system was forced to process complexity years before their peer systems encountered it. The calm that people admire is not serenity. It is the composure of someone whose threat detection system never found a reason to stand down. The emotional maturity that colleagues rely on is not a gift. It is the product of thousands of hours of childhood emotional labor, performed without compensation, without acknowledgement, and without the option to say, "I am 8 years old, and this is not my job." The grief that lives inside this mechanism is one of the most poorly understood forms of loss in psychology. Pauline Boss described ambiguous loss in 2000 as the kind of grief that occurs when the loss is not clear, not nameable, not socially recognized. The person who was parentified did not lose a parent, they lost a childhood. But nobody died, nobody left. The family may look functional from the outside. The grief has no event to attach to, no funeral, no specific day when everything changed. It is a grief for something that was never fully present, rather than something that was taken away. And this is why it often goes unrecognized for decades. The person does not feel traumatized because nothing traumatic happened in the way the world defines trauma. They feel tired. They feel old. They feel a vague heaviness that intensifies at moments when other people are being carefree. A vacation. Everyone in the group is laughing, swimming, sleeping in, making decisions based on what sounds fun. and the person with the old soul is scanning. Is everyone okay? Does anyone need anything? Is the restaurant reservation confirmed? Is the mood stable? They cannot stop. Not because they want to manage the trip, because the management protocol has been running since childhood and there is no off switch. Sitting in a chair doing nothing while other adults handle things feels physically wrong. The body reads unstructured time as dangerous. The nervous system interprets not being useful as not being safe. And the person reaches for the thing that always worked, being competent, being the one who anticipates, being the steady presence in the group, because that is the only mode the system was ever taught to run. The vacation is supposed to be rest. For this person, it is a performance of rest while the monitoring system runs at full power underneath. Here is where the honest split belongs, because without it, everything described above becomes a single narrative, and the single narrative is incomplete. There are two versions of feeling older than your age, and they run on different wiring. Version 1 is developmental acceleration through necessity. The mechanisms described in this video, parentification, adultification, stress-driven prefrontal acceleration, hypervigilant theory of mind. This version produces maturity that is real and functional, but was installed as a survival adaptation. The person is genuinely more capable than their peers in specific domains. They are also carrying a cost that their capability constantly obscures. The strength and the wound are the same thing. And the admiration the person receives for their maturity is, in a quiet way, a perpetuation of the dynamic. "You are so mature" becomes the adult version of "you are such a good kid." Both sentences reward the person for carrying weight that was never theirs. Both feel like recognition. Both are actually assignments. Version 2 is temperamental. Some people genuinely process the world at a depth that exceeds the norm for their age, not because of what happened to them, but because of how their nervous system is built. Higher processing sensitivity, stronger reflective capacity, a preference for depth over stimulation that was present from birth. These people also feel older than the room. They also sit at the adult table by preference. They also get called old souls. The difference is that their maturity was not purchased with childhood emotional labor. It was present as a baseline configuration. And the gap between the two versions matters because the first one carries a grief that needs processing and the second one does not. The first one built maturity on a foundation of unmet needs. The second one built maturity on a foundation that was simply deeper than average. The question that separates them is not visible in the behavior. Both look the same from the outside. Both produce the same calm, the same competence, the same quiet authority. The question is internal. When you imagine being completely useless to everyone around you, not helpful, not needed, not the one who holds it together, just existing without providing anything, what does your body do? If the answer is relief, a softening, a sense of finally being allowed to just be, the maturity is temperamental. The depth is real, and it does not depend on being needed to feel safe. If the answer is panic, a tightening in the chest, a flash of "I would have no value if I stopped being useful," a sudden inventory of everything that would fall apart without the management, the maturity is adaptive. The competence is real, but it is welded to the identity so tightly that removing it feels like removing the self. Picture the test in a real moment. A Saturday morning, nothing is planned, nobody needs anything, the phone is quiet, the house is clean, the day is completely open. A temperamentally mature person feels the space and fills it with something they enjoy. Reading, walking, creating, resting. The space is a gift. An adaptively mature person feels the space and within minutes begins scanning for something to do, something to fix, someone to check on. The openness is not a gift, it is a vacuum. And the vacuum triggers the same alarm that used to fire in childhood when the house was quiet and quiet meant something was about to go wrong. The body learnt that empty time precedes bad events, and it never unlearnt that equation. So it fills the space with productivity, with management, with usefulness, anything to prevent the stillness from becoming the silence before the storm. The child at the family gathering who sat at the adult table at age 8 did not make a wrong choice. They made the only choice their nervous system allowed. The adult table was where the information was. The children's table was where the unpredictability was. And for a brain already calibrated to monitor, predict, and manage, the choice was not a preference. It was a survival calculation disguised as maturity. The adult that child became carries the calculation forward into workplaces, into relationships, into friendships, where they are always the steady one, the reliable one, the one everyone leans on. And the sentence, "you have an old soul," keeps arriving like a compliment that has a splinter in it, because the soul is not old. The soul was never allowed to be young. And the difference between those two things is the difference between a person who grew up early and a person who was grown up early. One is a depth, the other is a debt, and the maturity everyone admires was never free.